Stranger rescues dog covered in barnacles, changing its life forever. The rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the rocky Oregon coastline usually brought peace to Dr. Sarah Chin's early morning walks, but today was different. Through the dense marine fog, she spotted something unusual moving among the tide pools. Something far too large to be the typical sea life she studied as a marine biologist at the Pacific Northwest Marine Research Center. Drawing closer, her heart nearly stopped. There, collapsed on the rocks and barely moving, lay a large dog. Its coat was almost completely obscured by a thick layer of barnacles, giving it an alien, almost prehistoric appearance. The creature's labored breathing was the only sign it was still alive. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, immediately pulling out her phone to call the local emergency veterinary hospital. As she waited for someone to pick up, she cautiously approached the dog. Despite its frightening appearance, she could make out the distinctive shape of a Doberman beneath the cruel armor of marine growth. The dog's eyes, though clouded with pain, held no aggression, only a deep, penetrating exhaustion that spoke of a long struggle for survival. Sarah knelt beside him, careful not to touch the barnacle-encrusted areas that seemed to cover almost every inch of his body. "Hold on, boy," she murmured. "Help is coming." Within 20 minutes, Dr. James Harrison, the emergency veterinarian, arrived with his team. The sight stopped even the experienced vet in his tracks. "In 15 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this," he admitted, quickly assessing the situation. "We need to get him to the clinic immediately, but moving him is going to be incredibly painful." They carefully transferred the dog onto a stretcher, each whimper sending daggers through Sarah's heart. As they lifted him into the veterinary ambulance, Sarah made a split-second decision. "I'm coming with you," she announced. "I study barnacles. Maybe I can help." The next few hours were a blur of activity at the emergency veterinary hospital. Initial examinations revealed the dog was severely dehydrated and malnourished. The barnacles had attached themselves to nearly 60% of his body, creating a devastating burden that had clearly been growing for months. Blood tests showed signs of organ stress, and his temperature was dangerously low. "The biggest challenge we're facing," Dr. Harrison explained to Sarah, "is that we can't simply remove the barnacles without potentially causing severe damage to his skin and underlying tissue. Traditional removal methods could send him into shock." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through her knowledge of marine biology. "These are Polycypes polymerus gooseneck barnacles. They're some of the most tenacious species we study. But maybe," she paused, an idea forming, "what if we could convince them to release their hold voluntarily?" Dr. Harrison looked intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "In my lab, we've been studying chemical signals that trigger barnacle settlement and release. It's still experimental, but we've developed a compound that can cause them to retract their adhesive proteins. It's never been tested on a living animal before, but given the situation, at this point, we need to consider all options," Dr. Harrison agreed. "His vital signs are stable for now, but we're running out of time." Sarah spent the next several hours making calls to colleagues and pulling strings to get emergency access to her lab. By early afternoon, she had assembled a team of marine biology graduate students who volunteered to help, along with Dr. Emma Watson, a visiting veterinary surgeon from London who specialized in unusual cases. As they worked to formulate a safe version of the compound, Sarah couldn't help but wonder about the dog's story. How had he ended up in the ocean? How long had he been fighting to survive? The local news had picked up the story, and social media was buzzing with theories and concerns. They'd started calling him Atlas, after the Titan condemned to bear the weight of the world, a name that seemed tragically fitting. Dr. Watson took charge of coordinating the medical aspects of their unprecedented procedure. "We'll need to work in sections," she explained, treating small areas at a time to monitor for any adverse reactions. "The biggest risks are infection and shock." The first test area, a small patch on Atlas's shoulder, proved promising. The barnacles began to release their hold after about 30 minutes of treatment. Encouraged by this success, they proceeded with careful optimism, working through the night in shifts. Atlas remained remarkably calm throughout the procedure, as if understanding they were trying to help. Sarah found herself talking to him constantly, explaining each step in a soothing voice. "You're doing so well, brave boy. Just a little longer." By dawn the next day, they had cleared about a quarter of his body. The exposed skin was raw and irritated, but showed no signs of serious damage. Atlas's vital signs remained stable, and he even managed to eat a little when offered soft food. The story of Atlas's rescue and treatment spread rapidly. Marine biologists from around the world offered suggestions and support. Local news crews camped outside the veterinary hospital, and donations poured in to cover his mounting medical expenses. As days turned into weeks, Atlas's true personality began to emerge. Despite everything he'd been through, he showed an extraordinary gentleness with everyone who cared for him. His tail would wag weakly whenever Sarah entered the room, and he formed a particular bond with Lucy, one of the veterinary technicians who spent hours cleaning and treating his healing skin. The breakthrough in his case came from an unexpected source. Dr. Miguel Ramirez, a veterinary specialist from Mexico who had been following Atlas's story, reached out with a crucial observation. He had treated several cases of marine growth on sea turtles and suggested incorporating elements of their rehabilitation protocols into Atlas's treatment plan. The modified approach proved incredibly successful. By combining Sarah's chemical treatment with Dr. Ramirez's healing protocols, they were able to safely remove the remaining barnacles while minimizing trauma to Atlas's skin. As Atlas's physical health improved, they began the process of trying to identify his origins. He had no microchip, and no one had come forward to claim him. Missing pet reports from coastal areas were searched, but none matched his description. Sarah found herself visiting Atlas every day, even after her direct involvement in his treatment was no longer needed. She would sit with him during her lunch breaks, telling him about her day as he rested his head in her lap. The deep bond forming between them was undeniable. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into Atlas's recovery, Dr. Harrison pulled Sarah aside. "We've done everything we can medically," he said. "He's ready to be released to a forever home." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been thinking about this moment for weeks, but hadn't dared to voice her hopes. I'd like to adopt him," she said quietly, "if you think I'd be suitable." Dr. Harrison smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I can't think of anyone better." The day Sarah brought Atlas home was both joyous and challenging. Her small beach house needed modifications to accommodate a large dog, and Atlas still required regular medical attention for his healing skin. But watching him take his first tentative steps onto her back porch, his nose lifting to catch the ocean breeze, she knew every effort would be worth it. Atlas's recovery became a testament to the power of collaboration and innovation in veterinary medicine. The technique developed to save him was refined and documented, creating a protocol that could help other animals affected by marine growth. Sarah published a paper on the case in a leading veterinary journal, co-authored with Drs. Harrison, Watson, and Ramirez. But beyond the medical achievements, Atlas's story touched people in a profound way. His journey from near death to healing captured hearts worldwide and inspired a series of children's books about marine conservation and animal rescue. 6 months after his rescue, Atlas had transformed into a different dog entirely. His coat, once hidden beneath barnacles, grew back glossy and black. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a bright, loving gaze. He became a regular sight on the beach where Sarah had found him, though now he wore a special wetsuit during swimming sessions to protect his sensitive skin. Sarah established a foundation in Atlas's name, dedicated to helping other marine-affected animals and supporting research into the increasing incidence of marine life interactions with domestic animals due to changing ocean patterns and human activity. 1 year to the day after finding Atlas, Sarah sat on her porch watching the sunset, her loyal companion by her side. Atlas rested his head on her knee, completely at peace despite the sound of waves in the distance. The scars from his ordeal would always remain, but they had faded into marks of survival rather than suffering. As she ran her fingers through his soft fur, Sarah reflected on how this extraordinary dog had changed not just her life, but had touched so many others. Atlas had brought together people from different countries and disciplines, advancing both veterinary medicine and marine biology in ways no one could have predicted. That evening, as they walked along the beach where their story began, Atlas spotted something in the tide pools. He approached cautiously, then turned to Sarah with a gentle woof. There, struggling in the shallow water, was a stranded seal pup. Sarah immediately called the marine mammal rescue team she now kept on speed dial. As they waited for help to arrive, Sarah watched Atlas lie down at a safe distance from the seal pup, his body positioned between it and the waves, as if standing guard. In that moment, she saw their journey come full circle, the rescued becoming the rescuer. The story of Atlas, the barnacle-covered dog who defied death, continued to inspire long after his dramatic rescue. He became a local celebrity, visiting schools with Sarah to educate children about marine life and animal welfare. His gentle demeanor with everyone he met seemed to suggest that despite his traumatic past, he had never lost faith in human kindness. Dr. Harrison often remarked that Atlas's case had changed how the veterinary community approached seemingly hopeless cases. Sometimes the most desperate situations force us to think beyond conventional solutions, he would say during veterinary conferences where Atlas's case was presented. Atlas taught us that innovation often comes from crossing boundaries between disciplines. The research triggered by Atlas's case led to further discoveries in marine biology and veterinary medicine. Sarah's team identified new patterns in barnacle settlement behavior that helped protect both marine and domestic animals. The chemical compound developed for Atlas's treatment was refined into a safe, effective solution for removing unwanted marine growth from various surfaces, benefiting both the shipping industry and marine conservation efforts. But perhaps the most profound impact was the ripple effect of compassion Atlas's story created. The foundation established in his name helped fund numerous animal rescue operations and supported families facing overwhelming veterinary bills. Time and again, people would donate with messages about how Atlas's fight for survival had given them hope during their own difficult times. For Sarah, the greatest gift was the daily joy of sharing her life with this extraordinary dog. Atlas's morning routine now included a careful patrol of their beach, always on the lookout for creatures in need of help. His previously traumatized body grew strong and athletic, though he retained a peculiar gentleness that made him a favorite among injured animals at the rehabilitation center where he sometimes accompanied Sarah. 3 years after his rescue, Atlas received recognition from the American Veterinary Medical Association for his contribution to veterinary science. The ceremony, held at a beachfront hotel, was attended by many of the people who had played a role in his recovery. Dr. Ramirez flew in from Mexico, and Dr. Watson came from London. Even Lucy, the veterinary technician who had helped nurse him through those first critical weeks, traveled from her new job in Seattle to attend. During the ceremony, as Atlas sat calmly beside Sarah while she delivered a speech about the importance of never giving up on an animal in need, a spontaneous storm broke out. Rather than showing any sign of distress at the sound of crashing waves and rain, Atlas remained perfectly composed, as if to demonstrate how completely he had overcome his trauma. That evening, back at home, Sarah watched Atlas playing with his favorite rope toy, his joy in the simple pleasure of life evident in every movement. The dog who had once been trapped in a prison of barnacles now moved with the grace and confidence of an animal who knew he was loved and safe. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah found Atlas in his usual spot by the window, watching the ocean. The moonlight silvered his coat, and for a moment, she was transported back to that foggy morning when she'd found him. The contrast between then and now never failed to move her. "You know what, Atlas?" she said softly, sitting beside him. "Everyone thinks I rescued you, but sometimes I wonder if it wasn't the other way around." Atlas turned to look at her with his soulful brown eyes, then gently placed his paw on her hand, as he often did when she was lost in thought. In that gesture was all the wisdom and forgiveness of a creature who had endured the unthinkable yet chosen to trust again. The next morning, they walked along the beach as the sun rose, their footprints marking the wet sand side by side. The marine biologist and her remarkable dog, both forever changed by a chance encounter that proved that sometimes the greatest scientific breakthroughs come wrapped in fur and require nothing more complicated than an open heart and the willingness to try something new. Atlas's legacy continued to grow, inspiring a new generation of veterinarians and marine biologists to think creatively and work across disciplines. But for those who knew him best, his greatest achievement was simpler. He showed that even in the darkest circumstances, hope could take root and flourish, much like the barnacles that had nearly claimed his life but had ultimately led him to his true home. As Sarah watched Atlas chase seabirds along the shoreline, his bark echoing joyfully across the beach, she smiled at how far they'd come. The morning fog was rolling in, much like it had been on that fateful day, but now it felt less like a shroud and more like a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries can emerge from the mists of ordinary days. Atlas paused in his play to look back at her, tail wagging, eyes bright with life and love. In that moment, Sarah knew that while science had saved Atlas's life, it was love that had truly set him free. And in saving him, they had all discovered something profound about the resilience of the spirit and the endless possibilities that exist when compassion meets innovation. The story of Atlas, the barnacle-covered dog who became a symbol of hope and healing, would be told for years to come. But for Sarah, the real miracle wasn't just in saving his life. It was in all the lives he touched along the way, proving that sometimes the greatest scientific discoveries come not from laboratories or research papers, but from the simple act of stopping to help a creature in need on a foggy morning by the sea.